Appreciate it. And Congressman Pinger, JC, it's an honor to be here today. Thanks very much for a newly retired Navy flag officer to be in this panel here talking about this. These items are really important. Honored to be here with my Japanese colleague. I just spent the last 2 years of my career in Singapore, and he talked about some of the close partnership that is going on with Japan, and quite frankly, the urgency and the vigor of how Japan is operating in the theater today is really, really impressive, and I'll touch on that a little bit. It's also special for me to be here in this room, and I want to thank the parliamentarians that are in the room. I was a Navy commander in this room 13 years ago as the deputy director of our Senate liaison office, and so it was a chance for a younger version of me to see the Senate, the staff, and our parliamentarians work every day, and so the work that you do for your nations is really important. We had great strategic conversations yesterday and today, and so what I thought I would do is just give you a little bit of what my perspective was like in the last couple years operating and out there, and what the Joint Force is doing, what our allies and partners are doing, some of the integration in the maritime security environment, and some of the access and posture issues we've talked about a little bit, and there are certainly risks, but there are some opportunities as well. So the U.S. Joint Force operating in the Western Pacific today, what does that look like? Today, the U.S. Joint Force is manned, trained, and equipped to fight peer conflict tonight. And without ego or hubris, our Joint Force is ready to do that. The young men and women that are out there operating our forces, flying our airplanes, driving our ships, operating our multi-domain task force, they are ready. And we are clear-eyed about what the security challenges are, make no bones about it. Most of the young men and women that are operating know full well that we're in a different moment in time, and we're no longer in a permissive environment. And so the way that our Joint Force has grown up over the last 20 years operationally, we were largely in a permissive environment. We could go where we wanted, when we wanted. We know that times have changed. And so our ability to coordinate fires, our ability to do that in all domains, our ability to command and control that is robust. But we are respectful of what the threat is. They're not 20 feet tall. We're not 20 feet tall. They've got strengths. We have strengths. The challenge that we see clear-eyed, and what I worked a lot in the last 2 years, is once the fight starts, and God hopes that it doesn't, but once it does, how do you sustain it? How do you prepare for a protracted conflict? And as we talked yesterday, there was great conversation that we have work to do, certainly on the U.S. side. So that's sort of a tactical comment. From an operational comment, the integration with friends, partners, and allies like the Japanese, like the Australians, like the British, when we kind of talk about some of our high-end systems, there is great work being done there. We talk a lot about inside the joint and coalition force about interoperability, but really part of what we're trying to drive, and many of you have heard the term, but I think it's worth noting, is interchangeability. And so a couple of the speakers yesterday elucidated a low point that the U.S. Navy is in. That is true. I introduced myself to Eric yesterday, and I said, hello, I'm one of the admirals that outnumbers the ships. I certainly would love to have more ships than admirals in the U.S. Navy. But what that means is that every Japanese cruiser matters. Every Japanese oiler matters. The French this week have deployed to the Indian Ocean and to Southeast Asia. That deployment for the Charles de Gaulle Strike Group is incredibly critical. The Brits are in the final stages of preparing for the Prince of Wales deployment in the next year. Every platform matters out there. So while we are at a little bit of an ebb in the U.S. Joint Force structure, every ally, every friend, every partner going out there working with us and finding interchangeability so that an F-35 goes into the fight, it really doesn't matter what flag it is. If it's a Japanese oiler fueling a U.S. Navy destroyer, if it's a U.S. Navy oiler refueling an Australian shooter, that is the kind of interchangeability we want, not just from a fires or combat perspective, but also from a sustainability perspective. And so we're working hard on that. And like I said, strategically, if you think about it, deployments like Charles de Gaulle, deployments like Prince of Wales, That is helping us to understand that linking Europe, like we talked about yesterday, to the Indo-Pacific is very important. So we all understand that there's some good news that's happening right now, but we're clear-eyed about what the challenges are in the next 24 to 36 months when we kind of talk about what some of these timeframes could be. Living in Singapore in 2 years, I got a chance to really understand better the maritime security environment. And there is a lot of great progress and work that's being done there. So when we talk about the ASEAN nations attending things like Shangri-La Dialogue and IISS running an incredibly productive forum there in Singapore every year. There's talk in the Pacific about, do you need a NATO in the Pacific and what does that look like? Probably a bridge too far, really hard to say exactly what that would look like, but what I think is happening positively is these webs of connectedness of Coast Guards that are in ASEAN nations and other friends that are building a more coherent network at sea for understanding what is happening in the environment, that you can combat black market activity, that you can combat illegal fishing, just for a couple of examples. But how do you keep those Coast Guards at sea, creating that kind of presence that creates that kind of stability? There's an integration that has to happen with our regular navies. And I think the minister would agree that we're working really hard on how we integrate some of those regular Navy, regular force activities with some of those Coast Guard activities, because I think we're seeing real progress. It's important for the U.S. force and the U.S. Coast Guard. Admiral Linda Fagan, our Commandant of the Coast Guard, has been at Shangri-La Dialogue for the last 3 years in a row. And she is driving U.S. Coast Guard integration along with those other ASEAN friends to try and show that there's real enduring commitment to our friends in the region. The last thing I'll talk about, and it's a little bit particular from where I lived in Singapore, is they are leading in the information sharing and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief efforts. So their information fusion cell that sits on the banks of the Strait of Malacca is incredibly important. And if you talk about wanting increased awareness of what is happening, good, bad, ugly, inside of that incredibly important choke point, we're doing really good work there. So lots of friends, allies, and partners sitting side by side, monitoring the information environment every day, and then across the hall, a disaster response center. And so we know it is not if, but when the next disaster is going to happen. And so the only way that we can be ready to handle the next tsunami or the next humanitarian assistance event is if we're training in peacetime today. And so there's a lot of good work that's happening there while we're being able to do that. Last thing I'll just talk about real quick is access and posture, and U.S. leadership, along with friends and allies in the region, are working very hard at trying to spread the field, so to speak. We know that it's going to be a contested environment, a non-permissive environment. We know that we need to reload and refuel and rearm and resupply our forces in different places. They're no longer a hub and spoke system can work, and time and distance in the Pacific is your enemy. And so we're having robust conversations about doing things in Australia that the U.S. Joint Force has never done before. The last point I'll mention is just the Philippines. The work that is being done there, and from a U.S. Navy perspective and Joint Force perspective, it's ironclad. I was in Palawan about a year ago executing our Pacific Partnership mission. If you look at what is the work, has already been mentioned, the EDCA sites, but Secretary Austin's last trip, there was just another agreement that furthered our information and intelligence sharing authorities. I think that that's really important. And so I look to continue to partner with our Philippine friends in the future, and I think that that is a fundamental element of what our plans and our structure will be in the coming years and months. So looking forward to the conversation and any other questions. Thanks so much.
Mark, thank